Elections have consequences. Some have more consequences than others. The French legislative election to be held on June 30th and July 8th has been called the most consequential French election in decades. Why is this election so important? What is it about? What is its most likely outcome? What does the RIWI-Unbound survey say about its most likely outcome? What will be its impact on France, on the world, and on financial markets? The performance of the populist right-wing parties was mixed in the recent European Union parliamentary elections. They did well in France, Austria, and Italy, but they did not do so well in the Netherlands, Sweden, and Spain. As a result, there's a huge disparity of the share of national votes received by these parties in different countries. At one end of the extreme, the populist right got only 10% of the votes in Spain. At the other end of the extreme, the populist right got 38% of the votes in Italy and 37% of the votes in France. Why this huge disparity? With the National Rally in France set to soon become the biggest party in the country, what is special about France that it has become fertile ground for the so-called far right? Voters support political parties that they believe best address their concerns. So what are the top concerns of French voters right now? Polls suggest these are their top 3 concerns. 1, their purchasing power, meaning the economy. 2, their personal security, meaning crime. And of course, immigration. People usually vote with their wallet. And it is not a surprise that the economy is the top concern of French voters. The French economy has barely grown over the past 5 years. This year, it is forecasted by the IMF to grow just 0.7%. As a result, per capita GDP in real terms has not budged from before the pandemic. This means no improvement in the standard of living. Notwithstanding the cheap euro, France's manufacturing PMI remains well below 50, in other words, in contractionary territory. Despite a tourism boom ahead of the Summer Olympics, the French service sector is doing worse than in Russia. In France's fiscal situation is in a bad shape, with its primary deficit, meaning before interest payments, at 2.4% of GDP. France's general government debt reached 112% of GDP at the end of last year, just behind that of the US in international comparison. The French economy is doing poorly, and the French public is right to hold President Emmanuel Macron responsible. However, the French economy is not doing worse than the German economy. So why did the French populist right get 37% of the votes in the EU parliamentary elections, but the populist right only received 16% of the votes in Germany? To understand why the French populist right did better than the French economic performance would imply, we need to look at the second and the third most important concerns of French voters: crime and immigration. It is understandable why French voters considered their personal security as a top election concern. Violent assault rate in France is the highest among major European Union countries. Assault rate in France is 3.5 times higher than in Germany, 6 times higher than in Italy, and 30 times higher than in the Netherlands. Moreover, violent assaults have increased by 60% since 2012. This means violent assaults have seen a bigger increase in France than in any other major European Union countries over the past decade. The US still has a higher murder rate than France, but there are many more instances of violent assaults in France than in the US. Increasingly, the victims of violent assaults are children. In April, in a town just south of Paris, a 15-year-old schoolboy walking home from music lesson was set upon by 3 youths wearing balaclavas and died later from cardiorespiratory arrest. In the same week, a 13-year-old girl was left comatose following an attack by 3 teenagers at school in the city of Montpellier. Violent assaults have become so common in France that personal safety might turn out to be the decisive issue in the coming French elections. But what is the cause of the high violent assault rate in France? And why hasn't Macron done anything about it? Why are crimes taking over France? A poll commissioned by C News Channel in early June showed 2/3 of French people believe crime and immigration were linked. Whether immigration is indeed the root cause for crime, immigrants as a share of the total French population is not particularly high. It is higher than that of Italy, but is much lower than that of Germany and Sweden. At just 13% in 2020, it is similar to that of the Netherlands and Denmark. However, there's a major difference in terms of the origin of the immigrants between France and other European countries. France was the second largest colonial empire after the British Empire. By the start of the 20th century, France had colonized much of North Africa, West Africa, and Central Africa. As a result of this colonial past, immigrants from Africa and the Middle East as a share of the French population is much higher than is the case for most European countries other than Sweden. Muslims are estimated to be 10% of the French population, the highest in Europe. But it's been estimated that between 50 to 70% of the French prison population is Muslim. There are more than 700 so-called sensitive urban zones in France. Many of them are effectively no-go zones for non-Muslims and the police. The growing popularity of the National Rally owes in large part to its promise to crack down on both crimes and immigration. It wants to increase police funding, make it easier to deport foreigners convicted of crimes, and cut social benefits to parents of repeat child offenders. Whether these policies will help solve France's problems or not, National Rally is at least trying to address the fact that crime and immigration have become top priorities for French voters. This is more than we can say about the French government under Macron. Various polls published this week suggest that while the National Rally and its former Republican allies will win the most votes, they will not be able to achieve an outright majority. This is also the finding of the RIWI-Unbound poll conducted over the course of this past week. However, there's a very important difference between the results of our poll and those of other polls. 11% of our survey respondents say that they plan to vote for Reconquest, another populist right-wing party led by Eric Zemmour. 11% is much higher than what the other polls are giving Reconquest. If our finding is correct, it would give the National Rally and Reconquest a combined vote share of 45% of likely voters. 45% is close enough to 50% for me to think that there is a 1 in 3 chance that the populist right might just be able to pull off a majority. My prediction is based on my assumption that crime and immigration are emotional issues that might push some voters toward the populist right in the last minute. The market, of course, will react poorly to a National Rally majority. This is because in this scenario, not only will we see a weakening of fiscal discipline in France, but we will likely see the brewing social tension in France boil over. Riots and social unrest will likely follow in this scenario. Spreads between French government bonds and German bonds should widen further, and the euro will extend the decline of the past week. Of course, this means that there's still a 2 in 3 chance that no party ends up winning the majority, and we have a gridlock between 3 ideologically distinct blocs. This outcome is consistent with the finding of the recent RIWI-Unbound G7 political poll survey, in which 40% of our French respondents say that political stability is very or extremely threatened by political polarization, just behind Germany and the US. My central scenario is extreme political polarization and political instability. There's a chance that Macron will try to persuade the left to go into a coalition government. But to succeed, he will have to make huge concessions on the fiscal side, including rolling back the increase in the retirement age. This would not be good for the French economy and French assets, as France's already meager potential growth will suffer further. I struggle to see a marked positive outcome from the French elections, at least in the short term. Macron and his predecessors have put off for too long the reforms necessary to turn France around. Now the economic and social costs of fixing the country will be that much higher as a result. Thank you for listening.